Hi, I'm Ariana Rabinovitch. This is Yoga Research and Beyond, the podcast, episode 67. I'm the founder of Yoga Research and Beyond, strength trainer, yoga teacher, and co-founder of New York Stretch here in New York City.
Hi, I'm Jules, and I teach biomechanics and anatomy and research literacy and so on to yoga teachers.
We're excited. This is our third time doing this iteration of this podcast. And today we have another paper for you. It's from the Journal of Integrative and Complementary Medicine. And the title of the paper, it's a survey. Jules is going to talk about what that means to have a paper that's a survey paper. The title is Not All Yoga Styles Are the Same, an international survey on characteristics of yoga classes. This is from 2023, and the first author is Gondar V. Mandlik. And this paper was done in Australia at the University of Sydney in New South Wales. I always think it's cool. Sometimes I forget to look at where the papers are done. And every time I do look, it's fun. I like seeing the range of where these papers are done. So the purpose of this paper is one of the challenges that we talk about a lot is yoga has so many parts to it, so many components that can make it beneficial, that some styles focus on more than others. So that makes it complicated when we're trying to recommend yoga for health benefits. How do we establish what those components are, what styles of yoga have those components, and then what health benefits you get from the components from those styles? So it's very complicated. And this is not the first paper that I've seen that tried to parse out what those components are. I like the discussion. I think it's an important discussion, but it's also a really hard discussion. It's hard to get the answers. So this is the first one I've seen that tackles this in a survey method. The last one I saw looked at a bunch of meta-analyses and systematic reviews to try to put it together. I think this is the only one I've read that is a survey. What about you, Jules, for components of yoga?
I don't know. This is not my area. I know that you've presented for my training a lot on styles of yoga and the importance of it. So I'm going to defer that to you on what's available, not my area.
Yeah. Okay. So it's an important question. The way they put this together, which I also appreciated, I thought this was cool. It's an online international survey. I like that they were pulling together information from teachers from all over the world. One challenge of that, though, was that the study the questions were in English. So even though it was open to everyone, you had to be able to speak English and answer the questions in English. You had to be 18 years or older and have at least a year of teaching experience. And they ended up with 968 yoga teachers, mostly female, not shocking. Tracks with my experience of yoga teachers. And they answered a bunch of questions. I will mention that the components themselves I thought were interesting. I wanted to know how they came up with these components, because previous papers that I've seen had fewer components. And I thought some of these could have been put together in like one category as opposed to separated. So the components they created, there were 7 of them. Yoga poses, pranayama, parentheses, breath techniques, meditation, relaxation, chanting, cleansing. That one, I would have loved to know what they meant by cleansing. And then the last category was lifestyle, or yama and niyama. So those were the categories.
The relaxation included shavasana, just to be clear. That was under relaxation instead of under like poses, so people understand.
Oh, they put shavasana in relaxation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. Yeah, and one other cool thing, which this is not like part of the data that they collected, but just a piece of information, was that maybe I forgot this, that some traditional yoga classes had 2 shavasanas or more than one throughout the class. And I'm so conditioned to the one at the end with the styles that I've taught and the styles that I've taken over the years that it took me a moment to, what? More than one shavasana? But I think that would be great. Delicious to have more than one shavasana. So that was just something that was a difference that they came across in the...
I mostly come across multiple savasanas when it's like shavasana, then pranayama, then shavasana, like there's like it's separated, like it's like a mini shavasana. And also sometimes when I do a lot of somatic stuff, I'll do like little mini breaks. But yeah it's definitely, we're used to the style that we get in our area.
Yeah. But the value, I think, of having more than one, I think would be phenomenal, because for me, I'm going off track, but for me, what I love yoga for is the somatic stuff you're talking about and the relaxation benefits. I'm not trying to get my workout in there and, my heart rate up and stuff. It's the relaxation. Should I have more than one shavasana? Yes, please. Anyway, off track. Yeah. So I think that's enough about the study. What do you want to...
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about surveys. One thing I want to mention, just in addition to that, is yes, there were 968 participants coming from 64 countries. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we think of like, English speaking, and then we think of like, the 5 countries, but it's 64 countries. So quite a wide variety of inputs, which I think is cool.
Very.
So one of the benefits of a survey is that it's an easy way to get a lot of participants to join, right? If you had to have all of these people go and do a yoga intervention, it would be very hard to manage as a study designer. It would be very hard to manage 968 people from 64 different countries and their actual yoga practice intervention. So surveys can be really beneficial for collecting a broad range of results or of answers. The thing with a survey, however, is that it is subjective instead of objective, right? It's hard to measure what people think. And so in order to measure what people think, the study designers have to create what we call like an operational definition. So like what Ariana was saying, like what is the operational definition of relaxation? They have to specify what the relaxation component is and that it includes shavasana. Or what is the operational definition of cleansing? They didn't tell us that. So I'm left to I'm thinking of, maybe like some Kriya yoga. I'm thinking of a variety of different things, but it wasn't reported in the paper. So then that leads me to ask, how well was it described in the survey? Were they good at providing an operational definition for cleansing? And what that also means, I want to talk a little bit more about the categories, but when you find a study that relies on subjective data that in order to measure creates this operational definition, it's really only valid for the context of that study. Because like Ariana was saying in the beginning, there are other studies that might categorize things differently. So it's hard to extrapolate that information to say, these are the styles of yoga that exist. No, these are the styles of yoga that this paper delineated and measured, but that's all that means. And I think that's one of the struggles with research is, and I think before I go on to talk more, because we're here again, isn't there a movement? You presented at it in the 300 hour, to try to standardize how yoga is reported in papers so that we know more. Can you talk a little bit about that and what it's called?
It's been a while since I looked at that paper specifically.
Yeah, it's been years.
Try to do that, and it's great. I was really excited about those. I think the first one I looked at that did that was 3 years ago, and they make a great case for the need to standardize those things. But the problem is that it didn't go anywhere. Nothing happened with it. It was this great presentation, and I guess they don't know how, or no one knows how to then implement that across the board. How do you do that? When so many different universities and countries are doing this kind of research, how would they find it? How would they have access to it? And how would they feel about using someone else's, framework for that? But yeah, it's really needed.
I will find those papers and put them in the show notes so that, so we can share that with people and they can take a look.
Really cool. Yeah.
That'd be fun. Cool. Okay.
We can also include the paper that I'm thinking of that talks about components and from systematic reviews. I think they have four categories for components. Okay. I was kind of wishing that they had looked at previous research that looked at that and used the same categories.
I'm sure they looked at the previous research as part of their lit review, but they didn't use it. They came up with their own.
I should check to see if they did, actually.
They might
not have. I'm going to look into that. All right.
Great. Okay. So the other thing I thought was interesting was, so you talked about the components. So let's talk about, they also categorized yoga into styles. And I thought that was really interesting. So they considered traditional yoga a style. There were 3 styles: traditional, exercise-based, therapy, and then there was unspecified. So the style was traditional, and that included like hatha yoga and ashtanga. Right. And then they called exercise-based yoga vinyasa and power, which I'm already confused because ashtanga is as a specific style is different than vinyasa, but there's a lot of places where it's like ashtanga-ish. And it's so like, do you know what I mean? If it's not the exact primary series, if it's a shortened version and you get to add 3 of your favorite poses, where does that fall into? So that was challenging. And then therapy was restorative or gentle. That was how they categorized it. And so like for me personally, I don't think all therapeutic yoga is gentle. I think if you're going to therapeutic yoga for some knee situation, it might include some single leg stuff. Like, so to me, I thought that was difficult because if you're a yoga therapist and you teach things other than restorative or gentle, how do you answer that? Do you answer therapy or exercise based?
Right.
So it was a little unclear. And that goes back to like, what are these operational definitions? It's like they're defining therapy as restorative or gentle. So as long as the participants are adhering to their operational definitions, then we have good data, but they might not be. Again, somebody might be like, I don't like this operational definition. I'm a yoga therapist, but I'm going to check exercise based. So the data, I mean, it is what it is, but it's not going to tell us exactly the one and only answer. And then they mentioned it in the limitations as well. Another problem with surveys, and then I'll pass it back to you, Ariana. But there's 2 big things with surveys. Number one is they generally rely on recall. This one is not because most of them are still teaching, but it's a lot of surveys. It's like, retrospective data. You have to remember what you did. Like I remember once someone sent me a study. It was about high heels and calf length, and it was like people had to report how many hours they wore high heels over the last 10 years. Like that is, somebody's literally going, okay, well, I worked so many weeks and I wore, you know what I mean? But it's like, it's just a huge guesstimation and people's memories aren't always accurate. And then the other one I thought was really interesting that they mentioned in the limitations here was social desirability. So again, like, what do they think the right answer would be? When you're asked a question, you're like, well, if I'm a yoga therapist, do I want to be exercise based or do I want to be gentle? And so your own, perceptions of what is better or right can enter the data sets.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I was thinking of when reading this.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing about how they answer the questions, and this showed up in differences in their answers, is they might teach a certain way that includes meditation and some chanting, a little bit, like a little bit of meditation and chanting. But then when they ranked the importance of those things, the ranking was much higher, like based on how they ranked it, like how important they think the breathing or the chanting or the meditation is. You think they would do a lot of it in the class, but it was actually the opposite for a lot of the answers, that they were doing a little bit of that. And it just spoke to me because in terms of popularity of group yoga classes, they may really, I was trying to think why they would answer that in that way. It might be that they really appreciate those things and see the value of those components, but they're not that popular, or it's hard to get people in the room for those kinds of classes. And so
studio owner is pressuring them to get more students.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was just something that stood out to me.
That's a cool insight. I didn't catch that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing with surveys. It's all very subjective, and what mood are they in at that day, and what they remember, everything that you're saying. Yeah. But still, I still appreciate it. And
I did too. I thought it was, they provided a lot of data. The tables are great. If you get the paper, you can look at tables 2 and 3. And they just provided a lot of like averages, a lot of demographics, which is, again, like, what does this study mean? We're not, one of the things that we talked about before we jumped on this, and hit record, was like, it's so easy to see a study like this and then be like, oh, this means that average yoga teacher is 40 years old. It's like, well, that just happens to be the average age of the people studied here, so it's useful data for maybe a future study that wants to compile a bunch of data and report on it. But it's not the type of paper that you just like see this one thing and then make all of this meaning and turn it into a social media post or a mainstream media article, which is what happens. And so the whole point of this podcast is to help you kind of look at what we see when we read these articles, without looking for all of that meaning. And so like what Ariana just shared, how she just recognized that they were, making the meditation more meaningful, but then not teaching it as much. Like, I missed that. That's good. You should read these papers over and over. Every time you read them, you see little gems in them. But anyway, back to the tables. I think it's really nice. There's a lot of demographic information, tells you kind of where people teach in general, what their education is. Go ahead.
I thought that was interesting. The places, it was fun to see that list.
Yep.
Corporate, parks, hospitals, rehab centers. That was nice to see.
And what I thought was really cool was that the way they broke the table down, they separated those styles. So it was traditional, exercise, and therapy, and they separated it so you could see. And it was actually pretty consistent across the board. Like, it wasn't like traditional yoga was like, the teachers were older or younger or whatever. I mean, of course they weren't the same, but there wasn't anything that was like super glaringly opposite, except maybe studio. The yoga studio, there was less traditional yoga, which was kind of interesting. But other than that, this is a fun thing to go ahead and look and see what's being taught out there. And yeah.
And I wonder, like, now what? Okay, so they did this. I'm sold on the importance of it. I love the discussion. I love the question. And then now what? So are they suggesting that future papers, like, these are the components we should be looking at when we're looking at health benefits? Like, I
don't think they did that. They weren't like, making themselves more self-important than they are. I think they just said the last sentence, future studies would benefit from a broader recruitment of non-English yoga teachers as well as therapists. And it would be important to collect more detailed information regarding training received and, students being taught to determine the effect on inclusion of different yoga components. Yeah. I think they're just like that, in order to do a survey, you have to ask a question. So you have to structure it in a certain way. And I think they did a nice job with that.
Yeah, me too. I enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more of it. I
would too.
How, like, the non-English speaking, I'm curious. And over time, if styles change and components change, There was a paper I came across last week that's in India, and they're looking at, I'm going to mess up the title of it, but they're talking about the like wellness industry's impact on yoga. That's what I'm understanding from the title, and like what that means. And so they caught my attention because I know that there is this tension about the Westernification of yoga. And I don't think that paper was a survey, but it was interesting to me in talking in the conversation about how yoga is being taught and used in different parts of the world.
Well, and that's, I mean, one of the biggest challenges is, how do you define yoga? You know, you're going to get a different definition from a Iyengar teacher than from a Sanskrit scholar. Do you know, like, you know, so it is built into the struggles of compiling data around yoga, is that nobody can agree on a definition. Yeah. So I like these attempts. I think they're valid. And even if they don't give us like meaningful results to go do something with, it helps us think. It helps us be more curious. And that's, to me, the point of research.
The whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
Thanks for the conversation, Jules.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Next time.